So the Catholic perspective and the Catholic teaching, long-standing teaching, has been this idea of redemptive suffering, okay? We can actually suffer justly or unjustly, okay? To help someone who isn't suffering in a mysterious way get to heaven. How many of you would suffer for someone you don't know? Awesome. Because that's actually what we do when we suffer in a mysterious way. And we won't know, again, this side of heaven, we won't know. But actually, the way we suffer and the way we unite our suffering with the cross of Christ on Calvary, in time for us, outside of time for God, is a mystery, is the mystery of redemptive suffering. We participate in Calvary for other people also. It's just... So one thing that I've always been quite interested in is the Christian side of the health and wealth gospel, okay? And coming from New York, I had no idea what this was until I moved to Virginia in 1990. And then I became well aware of it. That according to the health and wealth gospel, and you guys might know this better than I do, the Joel Osteen's, I guess, right? And who's that?
Creflo Dollar.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. God wants to be rich. Filthy rich. Benny Hinn, all across the
Yes, oh yes, I forgot, yes.
Mike
So-
Murdoch.
So again, it's the scandal of this is so big because I know of a person who told me they wouldn't become Christian because of people like this. Okay. So according to the position, since Christ paid on the cross, paid the full price for salvation of our soul and body, therefore all Christians should be wealthy and healthy in this life. There's no point to suffer because Christ has already suffered for us. All suffering must therefore be of the devil due to a lack of faith.
By his stripes we were healed.
Yep. We just went over 15, 16 passages that actually didn't say that. So since Christ suffered, that was the redemption, our suffering is not redemptive. But this position greatly fails to recognize that this great gift of uniting our sufferings with Christ is not meaningless. But precisely, it is when we join our sufferings, we share in the resurrection. Because after Christ suffered, what happened? He died. After he died, he rose from the dead. That's precisely the process we're going through. On the afternoon of the 28th of May, 1941, Maximilian Kolbe, a religious monk, was arrested by Nazi soldiers for sheltering Jewish people in a church community in Poland. He was sent to the notorious Auschwitz concentration camp as prisoner number 16670. By the end of July 1941, 3 prisoners disappeared from the camp, and the Nazi commander decided to pick 10 men and starve them to death in order to stop any prisoners from escaping in the future. Okay? So their justice was to make people suffer in order to make reparations, so to speak, and get people to stop, right? When one of the selected men cried out, "My poor wife, my poor children, what will they do?" Colby immediately offered to take his place. In the starvation cell, he led the condemned men in song and prayer and encouraged them in their sufferings. After 2 weeks of dehydration and starvation, he was the only remaining person. The guards were so intent to empty the cell so that they could put more people in to starve, dehydrate, and suffer, that they decided to give Maximilian Kolbe a lethal injection of a poison. They used muriatic acid. It's a really strong acid. He raised his left hand and calmly received the injection. The man whose place Kolbe had taken, who actually recently died, when I say recently, he died about, I think it was about 8 years ago. He lived till he was 95. So this person who cried out, my family. He spent his entire life since 1941, after the liberation, and he survived Auschwitz, okay, one of the few. He spent his entire life going around the world telling about the mercy and the beauty and the love of Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe is a saint. And if you ever have the opportunity to read the story about this, it is so moving. So many people heard the story over the years, have experienced radical changes in their life. They couldn't even count after the first couple of years of this gentleman going around telling about God's love and the mercy and so on and so forth. But what if no one ever heard about the story? What if they all died and that story never came out? What would Maximilian Kolbe's suffering mean?
It would still be redemptive.
Awesome. That's precisely correct. Because just because someone doesn't hear it, who knows? The one important person, right? Absolutely, it's still redemptive. It's one of the first questions I'm going to ask the Lord when he brings me home. You have to tell me about this because this is just boggling my mind. What about all of the suffering that occurs? We mentioned loneliness, about older people who live alone. They have lost their spouses or don't have family around. The suffering that they have, okay? What does that all mean? Well, again, it's a mystery, but it has to do with this idea of redemptive suffering, okay? And this is hard sometimes to get our arms wrapped around this depth of this theology. But if Christ is asking us to pick up our cross daily and to come follow him, okay, the question is, well, how do we do this? First and foremost, by worshiping God. Okay? Like Job did. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Okay, he worshiped and he took responsibility. Test yourselves by examining your hearts. By offering our sufferings up to God. Is anyone among you suffering? Then he must pray.
What's that a quote from?
That is from James. The prayer of a righteous man. Is that in that James 2, I believe? I probably should have put this as number 1, but I couldn't overpass by worshiping. Okay, so, but to give thanks. To give thanks even for our sufferings. Because we're found worthy that we should participate in the passion of the Lord. By looking to Christ's example to give us strength. So not only did Christ suffer physically, but all of his friends decided to leave. And they weren't even with him, okay, outside of a couple of people, even at the foot of the cross. The humility on top of the physical pain, and obviously the spiritual challenges that he had when he was crying out to the Lord. My God, why have you forsaken me? But that's a psalm. Okay, he's referencing a psalm, and if you read through that psalm, what comes right after he says that? He gives thanks. In humble obedience, Christ asks his Father, shall I not drink of the cup which the Father has given me? If it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Okay? This cup. Okay? Scholars are back and forth on this, but this is one of the cups of the Passover meal that signifies the suffering. So he's asking his Father, do I need to do this? And it was almost like a rhetorical question. Hey, Dad, do I really have to do this? I know I need to do this. By looking at his return and the promise of everlasting life, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Christians are another Christ. Is that in our future? If we trust in the Lord? Yes, it is. He's not coming back on his promise. Is suffering easy? Not at all. I mentioned this earlier. My mother, through her sufferings, would say, Eric, always remember to offer it up. There was a time, a couple of weeks, I was in my final semester in college, and I was the first of my family to go to college. And my mother did everything that she could to make it to graduation. Okay? She passed away on March the 3rd of 1990, and I graduated May 3rd of 1990. 2 weeks before she passed away, I was home, and the only relief that my mother could get is she would lay in bed, and her middle son, which is me, I would rub the base of her neck just to give her a little bit relief from the pain. And she taught me at that very moment what this actually meant. And 10 years later to the day, my wife and I lost 2 children. But I'm absolutely convinced that this prepared me for what was to come. And it was in my mother's glorious suffering that I came to understand what this means. We are priests of God by our baptism. We are not ministerial priests who offer up the sacrifice of Christ on the altar at Holy Mass. But as non-ministerial priests, we do offer something to God. Our bodies, our actions, our labor, and even our sufferings. Lord, may you take my sufferings for the sake of the body, which is your church. This is why we have redemptive suffering. I want you guys to just take a moment to read this. It's from Mother Teresa. Can everyone see it?